All right, guys, I am going to show you on this diagram a little bit more in depth about moon phases and why we see them. Okay, so the first thing I want you to notice is that this diagram says it's from above. So if we're looking at the moon orbiting around the Earth from above, we can see that the sun is over here to this side, the Earth is in the middle, and the moon is orbiting around the Earth. Now, there's not 8 moons, we only have 1 moon, but this is 8 different positions, so we're talking about the 8 distinct moon phases. Now, first I'm going to show you what it looks like from above, and then we'll talk about what it looks like from Earth, okay? So first thing, this moon right here, I'm going to start here because this one's a little bit easier to think about. All right, so I am going to use my scribble tool. So up here in the corner, I'm using the scribble tool to show you what I mean when I talk about what's bright on the moon. Now, I'm going to color things in dark, so I'm coloring in the shaded part because it's a little bit easier to do that instead of trying to color things in bright, since we are starting with a white background. Okay, so this moon right here, the sun is going to shine on the half that's facing it, and then the other half that's away from the sun is going to be dark. So I'm going to go ahead and color this one in. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm trying to give you the right idea of what this looks like. Okay? All right, so this half of the moon is dark since it's facing away from the sun. Oh, it disappeared. Let me try that again. All right, so I'm going to shade in the side that is facing away from the sun. I'm going to make it dark. And the side that's facing the sun, I'm going to leave bright. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm just going to fill it in a little bit better so it's easier for us to see. That is the dark half of the moon. So if we're looking at it from above, this side that's facing the sun is going to be bright, and this side facing away from the sun is going to be dark. Now, as the moon orbits, it's not really going to look any different in any of these places. Now, keep in mind that this is not drawn to scale. The sun is much farther away, so it's not going to be tilted like this, not in reality. This is just a diagram to remind us where the sun is, okay? So all these moons are going to look extremely similar, okay? So this half that's facing away from the sun is dark, and the half facing the sun is what is bright. So that's why I left it white, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade all of these in just so I know what they look like. I'm not going to make you watch me do all these, so I'm going to pause it for just a second, and then I'll come back and explain it. All right, now that I've filled in my diagram, I'm going to explain a little bit more about why we see moon phases, okay? So first thing I am going to tell you, the moon orbits around the Earth counterclockwise, so it travels this direction. So it's going around that way, and I'm going to add a couple more arrows on here if I can get it to work. I'm going to add a couple more arrows on here just so we know what I'm talking about, okay? All right, I fixed the arrows. Okay, so the moon orbits counterclockwise. All right, so we know the order of the moon phases from our previous lesson. So we're going to start right here. This is our new moon. Because if I'm sitting on Earth and I'm looking at this moon, I'm not going to see any of the bright half of the moon. Now, in some cases, when it's kind of between these moon phases, since it takes about 4 days for us to go from one phase to the next, sometimes you'll see just a little line of light around the outside edge, but we still consider that a new moon phase. Okay. Now, as it changes to our next phase, this is waxing crescent. If I was sitting on the Earth, I'd probably see a little sliver of light over here on this side. Okay. So if I'm sitting on Earth, it's mostly dark that I can see, but I can see just a little bit of light right here on the right-hand side, and that's going to be my waxing crescent moon phase. Okay. Now, I'm going to go from waxing crescent to my next moon phase. So if I'm sitting here on Earth, the left-hand side is going to be dark and the right-hand side is going to be bright. And this is about half. So this is going to be one of my quarter moons, and this will be my first quarter moon since the light is on the right-hand side. Okay? And then from my first quarter moon phase, I'm going to my waxing gibbous moon phase. So now if I'm sitting here on Earth and looking at the moon, most of it's going to be bright, and it's going to be bright on the right-hand side. So this is going to be my waxing gibbous. I'm still going to see a little bit of dark. It's not quite full yet. So this is my waxing gibbous moon phase. Now we're going to move to our next moon phase, and that one's right here. If I'm looking at the moon from Earth, I'm going to see a full moon. I'm going to see the whole thing, or it's going to look like the whole thing is bright because I'm not seeing any of the dark half of the moon. Now, this is also when we could have a lunar eclipse, but the moon's orbit is tilted, so it's not always exactly inside of Earth's shadow. So we aren't always going to see a eclipse when it's right here at our new moon phase. Now, again, this diagram is not to scale. This is just to help us imagine where things are and how they move, okay? So the moon is not this big compared to Earth, and the sun is not this small compared to these two, okay? So this is just to help us picture what we're looking at. So that's why we can still see this moon, while it's over here on this side, okay? Now I'm going from my new moon phase into my next moon phase. So after the full moon, we're going to have a waning gibbous, because if I'm looking at it from Earth, it's going to be mostly bright, but that brightness is going to be on the left-hand side this time, okay? So I'm going to see just a little bit of darkness on the right, but it's still mostly bright, and that brightness is on the left, okay? So that is my waning gibbous. Now here, if I'm looking at it from Earth, our next moon phase is going to be the last quarter moon phase. So if I'm looking at it from Earth, if I'm standing, I'm going to get my scribble tool. If I'm standing here and looking straight at the moon, I'm looking at it this way. This is my, I keep moving the diagram by accident. This right here would be my left, and this right here on this side would be my right, okay? All right, so if I'm standing on Earth and looking down at it, this is my left-hand side. And so the brightness is on the left-hand side, and it's going to be about half of it that's bright, okay? And the same thing here. We're going from last quarter to our next moon phase. This is going to be my waning crescent, because if I'm looking at it from Earth, I'm looking at it this way. If I'm facing this direction, right here, if I'm facing this way, this is still going to be my left-hand side over here. So I'm going to have a little bit of light, but it's going to be on the left-hand side this time. So that is my waning crescent moon phase. All right. So now we're going to talk about what these look like from Earth, and we're going to put them on this diagram. Okay. So when you go to fill out your diagrams, you're going to do one from Earth and from above. Okay. So if we're on Earth and we're looking at what these are going to look like for us, we're going to have to get kind of creative with how to fill these in. Okay. I'm going to stick with the scribble tool because it's just a little bit easier for me. It just makes a little bit more sense. Okay. So if we're on Earth and we're looking at this moon right here, this is our new moon phase. My pen doesn't want to work. There we go. I got it working now. All right. So this is my new moon phase. So that means the whole thing is going to be dark. Now, I'm not going to color it in perfectly because it's kind of difficult to do, especially on the computer. So we're going to use our imagination. That one is completely filled in, and I'm going to go ahead and label it. I'm going to call it my new moon phase. Okay. So I'm going to put a text box in there so that I can put the name on there. That way I remember where they are and what they look like. Okay. So new moon is completely dark. And then the next moon phase is a waxing crescent. So we're going to have a little bit of light right here on the right-hand side, and then the rest of it is going to be dark. And again, it's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be able to fill it in completely. I'm giving it my best shot so that I know what I'm looking at when I come back to use it to study. Okay, so that is my waxing crescent, and I'm going to come over here and grab a text box again, and I'm going to label it. Okay. Now that I've shown you how to color these in and how to label them, I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them. I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to do the rest of them for you, and then I'll come back once I've finished. All right, now that I have drawn all of my moon phases and gone in and inserted a text box so that I can name them, we're going to talk a little bit more about what they look like and why they are this way, okay? So first thing I'm going to remind you of is to remember which way the moon orbits around the Earth. So it orbits counterclockwise, so it goes the opposite of the direction a clock does. So that right there, that arrow marks the direction of the moon's orbit around Earth. Okay, so we started with new moon, and we did this in our notes. We did them in order on purpose. So we start with new moon, we move to our waxing crescent, and then our first quarter, our waxing gibbous, our full moon, the waning gibbous, last quarter, and waning crescent. Okay, so this is what they would look like. Whoops. If we looked at them from Earth when the moon is in that position. So when the moon is between the Earth and the sun, we see a new moon. And as it's moving towards the full moon, we see these 3 moon phases. And then when it's the opposite side of the sun, it is a full moon phase. And then we go back towards the new moon. So as it orbits, those are the locations the moon will be in when we see those moon phases. Okay? So those are our 2 diagrams. That's what they're going to look like. This is the diagram from Earth, and this is the diagram from above. So if we're looking at the sun, moon, and Earth from above, the moon always looks the same no matter where it is, because we're not seeing a different perspective. We're just seeing it from one perspective. But while we're sitting on Earth, we see different perspectives. So we see different parts of the moon that are bright. And that's it.